Hi, it's Dwyer. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. It's Wednesday, September 28th, 2022. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now we know recently that Shakur Stevenson lost his title on the scales. Right? Even with a title on the line, even being in his mid-20s, Shakur Stevenson was able to lose that last 1+ pound to qualify to defend his own title. We know that when Floyd Mayweather fought Canelo, Floyd stipulated in the contract that Canelo come in a couple pounds lighter, right, than the weight limit. Because, again, every pound counts, right? Those last few pounds are the hardest to lose, even after a strenuous training camp. Now here, Chris Eubank is going to have to come in at 157. And of course, there are many of us who remember him at 168. So people are concerned, including his father. Right? Now, people need the history here. Understand that Chris Eubank, great fighter, had an unfortunate fight with Michael Watson, a guy who had beaten Nigel Benn, by the way. And of course, Watson got badly hurt in the fight. Keep in mind, Nigel Benn himself had a bad experience with Gerald McClellan, a fight in which Benn gets knocked out of the ring, gets back into the ring. Right? Unfortunately, we don't remember the fight for having been a great fight, which it was. Rather, we remember the fight for Gerald McClellan getting hurt. His boxing career never recovered. Now, boxers know that it's when you cut weight that your punch resistance goes. It's when you cut weight that you are very susceptible to getting badly injured. So I want people to consider a couple of things. Andy Ruiz, who many people seem to be obsessed about his weight, right? Andy Ruiz, after beating Luis Ortiz, talked about, and Google this, talked about how the extra weight helped him take Luis Ortiz's punches. Right? Ruiz, who admitted after the fight that Ortiz was a hellacious puncher, that Ortiz hit as hard as anyone he faced, including Anthony Joshua. Ruiz felt that he might have been dropped had he not entered the ring with some extra weight on him. We just saw a classic, right, folks? It was a great fight. Joseph Parker came in weighing in the 250s. Joe Joyce came in weighing in the 270s. Both guys took a lot of shots. Both guys can punch. But yet that fight made it to the 11th round. So now we get this fight, and I don't understand it. I'll be blunt here. This fight seems like a carnival event to me. This fight seems like a carnival event to me. You have Eubank, who has fought at 168, agreeing to come in at 157 against Conor Benn, Nigel Benn's son. Now I get it, right? There are the Hatfields and McCoys. There are the Eubankses and the Benns. right? I get it. Family argument. People are at each other's throats. Um, Chris Eubank Sr. wasn't really a big fan of Nigel Benn. I get the feeling here Connor Benn isn't that big a fan of Chris Eubank Jr., right? For Eubank Jr., and look, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'll play one here on sports internet. I believe for Chris Eubank Jr., this is just a payday, right? I don't believe he's caught up in the moment like he was for the Billy Joe Saunders fight, for example, or the George Groves fight. Well, let's talk about the weight loss. Folks, life's unfair. We have to make judgments looking at athletes. Now, from my seat, Chris Eubank Jr., why don't I call him Chris Eubank? No offense intended to his father, who I admire and respect. Right? Chris Eubank, in my opinion, is one of the best athletes in the sport of boxing. Right, folks? This isn't the guy cutting weight between fights. This isn't Ricky Hatton. This isn't Roberto Duran. Right? No. This is a guy who keeps himself in shape all the time. Right? He's more Evander Holyfield. He's more Manny Pacquiao than he is Ricky Hatton. Now let's look at his history, because understand, the only chance Conor Benn has in this fight, in my opinion, is if Chris Eubank is not Chris Eubank after weighing in at 157. Well, just understand, Chris Eubank's last 4 fights have been fought with him weighing 164 or less. Understand, 3 of his last 4 fights have been below 162 pounds. Understand here, the guy has had weeks, and I mean weeks, to figure out how to get himself down to 157. It's my understanding, based on research, that he walks around at 172. Right? Not in the 180s. I believe this guy's walking around weight is below Canelo's walking around weight. I believe he can find a way to weigh in at 157. Let me also point out, too, and I know it's a lot of money for regular people, but at this level of boxing, the $100,000 fine for every pound over isn't that big a deal. In other words, if Chris Eubank weighs 158, no one's going to call off the fight. He'll just have the $100,000 deducted from his paycheck. Right? Hopefully, he's on the up and up and he comes in at 157. But my point to you is, let's not confuse the $100,000 per pound fine, which sounds big at a time of economic uncertainty for the rest of us. But understand, I've watched sports where some athletes have been fined more than $100,000. Right? If it's a choice between you and your health, you'll pay the $100,000. Let's remember, Danny Jacobs faced a possible fine for his fight against Saul Alvarez. There was a rehydration clause. There was supposed to be a second weigh-in. He didn't even bother to show up for it. His attitude was, hey, I'm here to win the fight. If there's some monetary sanction, I'll pay it. So I'm not worried about Eubank fighting at 157. I think Chris Eubank is still going to be Chris Eubank, right? I believe this guy is an athlete. Look at the lack of baby fat on him in general. Just look at how he moves in the ring. Let me also point out, too, that longtime viewers here know I took George Groves over Chris Eubank. I took Billy Joe Saunders over Chris Eubank. But I believe Chris Eubank, more than most, has greatly improved his game. He's 33 now. Let's just say with that added experience has come a lot of wisdom. Not only do I feel he's the bigger man in the fight, I believe he's the better fighter in the fight. Well, I'm going to name some names. You stop me when you hear a name that you feel Conor Benn can beat. Right? Let me also point out that these fights were competitive fights for Chris Eubank. In other words, he lost some of them, but he was very much in the fight. I need for you to ask yourself whether Conor Benn, who's moving up to 157, right, whether Conor Benn would even be competitive against some of the guys I'm about to name. We mentioned him before: Billy Joe Saunders, George Groves, Avni Yildirim, Matt Korobov. Just understand, Eubank fought them. Eubank has fought the vastly superior opposition than Conor Benn. Now, all I'm saying is, if it were Nigel Benn, who was a gifted puncher, and understand, huge punchers only have to be right once, I would have more confidence in Nigel Benn, even in his 50s, than his son Conor Benn. Right? Catching up with and knocking out Chris Algieri after Manny Pacquiao dropped Algieri several times. Look up that fight. After Errol Spence dropped Algieri several times. And of course, let's do the math. Errol Spence, welterweight. Right? Welterweight. Having knocked out Chris Algieri doesn't really impress me that much on the Conor Benn side of the ledger. So I believe you're getting a gift here. Right? Minus 200. You know what? For a fight like this, where I'm getting the bigger guy, I'm getting the guy who's fought the better competition, I'm getting the guy who I feel is the better fighter. And of course, I'm getting the more experienced guy. And the guy who I privately feel is the better athlete. And all I have to do is pay a minus 200. No need to put a bow on the package. Wrap it up. I'll take it. I like Chris Eubank over Conor Benn. I'm not even going to hedge it. But I want people to understand the other side of the equation. If Chris Eubank enters the ring and he looks like he really needs dessert, right, he physically doesn't look ready for the fight because of the pounds he had to lose. And if his punch resistance is gone, because of the pounds he had to lose, because he's not coming in like Joe Joyce or like Andy Ruiz, he's not coming in as himself, he's coming in too light, then there is a chance that he gets stopped. If you're a conservative bettor and you want a hedge, then I would consider the Conor Benn by KO hedge. Right? In other words, Conor Benn has to catch an undernourished, in need of carbohydrates, Chris Eubank. If he catches anything closely resembling the real Chris Eubank, the fighter who Chris Eubank is when he makes weight and the weight isn't a catch weight. I believe Conor Benn gets stopped. I don't believe this is a competitive fight. Let me just say, I've seen the two guys together, right, giving interviews and stuff like that. Conor Benn is one of these young guys who does not know what he does not know. Right? Chris Eubank, by contrast, has been humbled in some fights. Right? George Groves, as I recall it, had one arm in the closing rounds of their bout and was still able to hold off Chris Eubank. Chris Eubank, known as the next generation, understands more than most, especially after having trained with greats like Roy Jones. He understands more than most that this sport is really a skill sport. That having physical attributes isn't enough. There's a mental side to the equation. That however good your camp went, the other guy might have a game plan and might have himself participated in a very successful camp. Right, so Chris Eubank is the one who has perspective here. Conor Benn, look, I understand his father was a great puncher. I saw his father in some great fights. No question about it. They called him the Dark Destroyer. Right, but folks, understand, there really should be very little nepotism in boxing. Occasionally, you stumble upon a Floyd Mayweather Jr. Occasionally, you stumble upon a Canelo and you realize he has big brothers. He has family members in the sport. Right? You see a Mikey Garcia and you understand Robert Garcia was a champion before Mikey was a champion. There's a big brother. Right? I get the idea that being in a fighting family can help you, but it can only help you so much. Right? Guys like Floyd Mayweather are outliers. Right? Mayweather, you saw him and you understood, look, whoever his father is, and we understand it was Floyd Sr., but whoever his father is, whoever his uncle is, and understand, Roger Mayweather was his trainer for several years. In other words, the Mayweathers are a big family. I don't want to leave out Jeff Mayweather in this conversation either. Right? But you understood whoever his family was. Floyd had great defense. I didn't have to know who his family was to look at a Floyd fight and say, wow, hitting this guy square is difficult. This guy has skills. This guy has world-class skills. You need to judge the fighter by the fighter, not by his family. I've looked at Conor Benn. He looks promising. In my opinion, he's not Chris Eubank. I like Chris Eubank to win that fight at a minus 200. Now let's swing for the fences. Right? Understand this is the speculative part of the internet. This is the gambling part of the internet. I'm not here to play it safe. If I see value, I'm going to pursue it. Now, you've heard me here talk about cagey vets. Right? These are the guys where you look at the age and you say, oh man, this guy's older. You look at the fight history and you say, wow, this guy has some wear on the tire. Right? Fighting big names, big punchers. This guy must be in the twilight of his career. Right? You look at the championships that the guy had and you say, well, wow, that was a few years ago. Right? The thought crosses your head. Is this guy just going to be a name on this younger opponent's resume? But then you start to think, how do you beat this guy? Can you beat this guy without having a big punch? Can you beat this guy by looking smooth and moving around the ring without really having a healthy right hand? And I don't think Caleb Plant has a healthy right hand. right? I have no inside information. I'm just a fan like everyone else looking at the films, right? There are times in Khaled Plant fights where you think, oh man, a Joe Joyce would certainly turn over a right hand in this moment, and Khaled Plant doesn't. Folks, I simply don't know of a way that someone could beat Anthony Dirrell, short of by cuts, right? Cuts could happen in any fight. Or Dirrell injuring himself, right? Entering the ring, slipping, tearing a knee. Short of something like that, I just don't know how you beat Anthony Dirrell. KG vet, experienced, has fought the best without a big time punch. Understand, Dirrell is the kind of guy who will stalk you for 12 rounds. You've got to give him something to think about. You've got to have a punch. You've got to use it. You've got to hit him a few times to get him off of you. Understand the problem, too, with fighting these KG vet types. They've been to war before. Right? You're across the ring and you're thinking, man, this fight is getting tough. You're thinking, man, we both landed big shots. Then you look across the ring and you realize, for my opponent, this is just another night at the office. So imagine my surprise when I find out Khaled Plant is fighting Anthony Dirrell. I'll concede Dirrell has a lot of miles on the tire. Point conceded. Many KG vets do. Dirrell's been in wars. Point conceded. But because I just don't have any idea how you beat Dirrell without having a punch that can stop him in his tracks. Because Dirrell strikes me as a highly skilled guy who is going to just be in pursuit of you the entire fight. Think Joe Frazier. Right? I just don't believe that the casino is crazy enough to give me 7-1 odds on Anthony Dirrell. Quite frankly, I'm not saying Dirrell, who has losses, runs the table at 168. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is there is not a guy at 168. That includes some of the guys he's lost to, David Benavidez. There's not a guy at 168 who deserves the odds that Khaled Plant is getting on this fight. Right? As I've said, the best bets make themselves. If you hear Anthony Dirrell linked with 7-1 odds, your response has to be, thank you very much. You know what? I'll take that bet. I believe this might be the bet of the fall. I like Anthony Dirrell plus 700, 7-1 odds, hedged with the over. Right? Because you know, and I know, that short of a cut or, a torn pectoral muscle or some bicep ligament injury, I don't see any way that Khaled Plant is going to stop Anthony Dirrell by KO. Right? So, I'll be the casino's Huckleberry. I'm taking Anthony Dirrell plus 700, right? 7-1. Hedged with the over in the Dirrell Khaled Plant fight. Let me also point out, too, that these are the fights where you can make serious money. Anthony Dirrell lost a few fights, right? Forget the fact that those fights were to great fighters, right? Anthony Dirrell lost a few fights He's older. We remember Caleb Plant fighting a great fight against Canelo, making it to the 11th round. Right? Okay, great. The 10th or 11th round. Right? Okay, fine. I believe people who know boxing understand that Anthony Dirrell is a serious competitor. He's real competition for Caleb Plant. And because Anthony Dirrell is going to come after Caleb Plant, right? He's not going to be standing there waiting around. This guy isn't a paycheck guy. This isn't the vet thinking, you know what, I want to remodel the house and, you know, I have a kid who's college age now since I'm in my late 30s. That's not this guy, right? This guy's straight competitor. He's like Joe Frazier, right? Straight competitor, right? Dirrell would not take this fight if he wasn't coming to try to win it. I like the underdog here. I'll take the plus 700. I'll be the casino's Huckleberry. I'll hedge it with the over, right? But make no mistake, if Dirrell gets the stoppage, I'm not going to be surprised. And I'm someone who thought that Caleb Plant had a real chance on Canelo. I had that Caleb Plant Canelo fight razor close. Right? Let's shake things up a bit. Anthony Dirrell, in my opinion, moves better than Canelo. Right? This is a serious fighter. As I've said, I would take Dirrell at 7-1 odds against anybody at 168. Right? He happens to be fighting Caleb Plant. That has me even more energized because Caleb Plant is back foot slickness. Right? Dirrell is two-handed, aggression, wants to engage you, is coming to fight you in the trenches. Right? To me, the fight styles clash. Caleb Plant is going to have his hands full. I'll take the underdog here, hedged with the over. Understand, too, the risk involved. If Caleb Plant somehow gets a stoppage before the over-under, you lose it all. If it goes over, then we're good like we were in the Joseph Parker fight, a fight I thought Parker was going to win, but it's okay. The reason we have hedges is to live for another day. Right? If this fight goes over, you're at a minimum living for another day. If Dirrell wins it by decision, then you're getting 7-1 odds and you're getting the win on the over. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. I like Chris Eubank, straight up. Right? If you're going to hedge it, Conor Benn by stoppage. I like the underdog here. Anthony Dirrell, 7-1. I'll take it. Hedged with the over. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I look forward to reading your comments. Thanks for stopping by.